Welcome back, everyone. This is part 2 of the Level 4 Robber of my new Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg series, where we will cover almost everything from alien civilizations to government mysteries. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this series, and of course, thank you for watching. Jeff Davis 8. The Jeff Davis 8, also known as the Jennings 8, refers to a series of unsolved murders involving 8 women whose bodies were found in the swamps and canals of Jefferson Davis Parish, Louisiana, between 2005 and 2009. The victims, who were all connected to each other through a small community in the town of Jennings, were involved in drugs and prostitution, which made their cases difficult to investigate due to the lack of reliable witnesses and the transient nature of the lifestyle. Each victim shared similar characteristics, leading investigators to believe that they were dealing with a single serial killer or a group working together. The women were often known to frequent the same circles, and several had provided information to law enforcement about other cases or criminal activities in the area, raising suspicions of police corruption or cover-ups. The investigation into the Jeff Davis 8 was plagued by numerous challenges. The small-town police force was ill-equipped to handle such complex cases, and there were accusations of mishandling evidence, overlooking key leads, and even potential involvement of law enforcement officials in the murders. This led to widespread distrust in the community, with many residents believing that the truth was being deliberately suppressed. Over the years, multiple suspects have been identified, but none have been definitively linked to the murders. Some theories suggest that the killings were carried out by a local drug ring, while others point to the possibility of a more organized operation involving human trafficking. The lack of concrete evidence and the complex social dynamics in Jennings have kept the case shrouded in mystery. Despite renewed interest in the case due to media coverage and documentaries, the murders remain unsolved. The families of the victims continue to seek justice, hoping that new evidence or a breakthrough in the investigation will finally reveal the truth behind the Jeff Davis 8 murders. Myojo 56 fire. The Myojo 56 fire, which occurred on September 1st, 2001, in the Shinjuku district of Tokyo, Japan, stands as one of the deadliest building fires in the country's post-war history. The blaze broke out in a 4-story commercial building known as Myojo 56, housing a mahjong parlor, a hostess bar, and other small businesses. The fire quickly spread through the structure, trapping many of the building's occupants. The fire started in the early hours of the morning on the 3rd floor, where a hostess bar was located. The narrow and cluttered layout of the building, combined with flammable interior materials, allowed the fire to spread rapidly. Smoke filled the stairwells and corridors, cutting off escape routes and leading to the deaths of 44 people, many of whom were unable to escape from the upper floors. Initial investigations suggested that the fire might have been the result of arson. This theory was supported by reports that a suspicious man was seen entering the building just before the fire broke out. Additionally, the building's safety measures were found to be grossly inadequate, with blocked emergency exits and a lack of functioning fire alarms, further complicating evacuation efforts. The tragedy of the Myojo 56 fire led to a public outcry over the lax enforcement of fire safety regulations in Japan, particularly in older buildings in crowded urban areas. The incident prompted the Japanese government to tighten fire safety standards, requiring stricter inspections and better emergency preparedness in commercial properties. Despite the suspicions of arson, the exact cause of the fire remains undetermined, and no one has been held accountable for the tragedy. The Myojo 56 fire is remembered as a stark reminder of the importance of fire safety and the devastating consequences when it is neglected. Wednesday Strangler. The Wednesday Strangler is the nickname given to a serial killer who terrorized the Shizuoka prefecture in Japan during the 1970s. The name originates from the unsettling pattern that many of the murders occurred on Wednesdays, adding an eerie predictability to the killer's otherwise unpredictable crimes. The Wednesday Strangler remains one of Japan's most infamous unsolved cases, leaving behind a legacy of fear and mystery. The crimes began in 1975, when the body of a young woman was discovered in a remote area of Shizuoka Prefecture. Over the next few years, a series of similar murders occurred, with the bodies of young women being found strangled in various rural locations. The killer's modus operandi was consistent. The victims were all women in their late teens or early 20s, abducted while walking alone and strangled with a rope or cord. The frequency of the killings, combined with the fact that many of them occurred on Wednesdays, led to widespread panic in the region. Women were warned not to walk alone, especially on Wednesdays, as the killer seemed to strike with chilling regularity. Despite the heightened awareness and increased police presence, the Wednesday Strangler continued to evade capture. The case became a major focus for the Japanese media, with extensive coverage and speculation about the identity of the killer. Some theorized that the murderer might have been someone familiar with the victim's routines, possibly a local resident who knew the area well. However, despite extensive investigations, the police were unable to identify a suspect or gather enough evidence to solve the case. As the years passed, the murders ceased, and the Wednesday Strangler seemed to disappear without a trace. The case remains unsolved, with no new leads or developments in decades. The identity of the Wednesday Strangler and the reasons behind the specific pattern of his killings continue to baffle investigators and haunt the memories of those who lived through the terrifying period. The legacy of the Wednesday Strangler is a haunting reminder of the fear that can grip a community when a killer operates with such methodical precision, and the profound impact unsolved cases can have on the collective psyche of a region. The mystery remains one of Japan's most enduring criminal enigmas: Redhead Murders. The Redhead Murders refer to a series of unsolved killings that took place across the United States in the mid-1980s. The victims, all women, shared the common trait of having reddish or auburn hair, which led to the name Redhead Murders. These cases remain one of the most perplexing serial murder investigations in American history, with many questions still unanswered. The first known case linked to the Redhead Murders occurred in 1983, when the body of a woman was discovered in West Memphis, Arkansas. She was found on the side of the road, her identity unknown, and with no apparent connection to the area. Over the next few years, more bodies were found along highways and rural areas in states including Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. The women were typically young, between 16 and 40 years old, and were often left in remote locations, making identification difficult. Most of the victims remained unidentified, and the circumstances of their deaths suggested they may have been hitchhikers or women living on the margins of society. This made it even harder for authorities to trace their movements or connect them to a potential killer. The consistent detail that linked these cases, the red or reddish hair of the victims, led investigators to believe that a single person or group might be responsible. Despite the similarities in the cases, law enforcement struggled to find solid evidence linking the murders. The victims' bodies often showed signs of strangulation, and in some cases, they had been sexually assaulted. However, the lack of forensic evidence, coupled with the wide geographic spread of the crimes, hindered the investigation. In 2018, a breakthrough occurred when a high school sociology class in Tennessee began researching the Redhead Murders as a class project. The students compiled information from various cases and worked with law enforcement to propose a potential timeline and suspect profile. Their work helped renew interest in the cases, particularly in identifying one of the victims, known as Jane Doe from Campbell County, Tennessee. In 2019, this victim was identified as 33-year-old Elizabeth Lamotte, who had disappeared from a group home in New Hampshire in 1984. Despite this identification, many of the Redhead murders remain unsolved, and the identity of the killer or killers continues to be a mystery. The Redhead Murders are a chilling reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by certain populations and the challenges law enforcement faces in solving serial crimes that span multiple jurisdictions. The hope remains that advances in forensic science and continued public interest might one day bring answers to the families of the victims and close this dark chapter in American criminal history. Sealab 3 Sabotage. Sealab 3 was an ambitious underwater habitat project initiated by the US Navy in the late 1960s, intended to explore the feasibility of humans living and working at great depths for extended periods. However, the mission, which was set to push the limits of underwater habitation, ended in tragedy and controversy, with allegations of sabotage adding a layer of mystery to the already complex situation. Sealab 3 followed its predecessors, Sealab 1 and Sealab 2, both of which had demonstrated the potential for deep-sea living, but had also exposed the numerous challenges involved. Sealab 3 was designed to be placed 610 feet below the surface, off the coast of California, with a team of aquanauts tasked with spending several weeks conducting scientific research and tests on new underwater technologies. The mission began on February 16, 1969, but quickly encountered serious problems. During the initial stages, the habitat experienced significant issues with leaks and malfunctions. As the crew attempted to repair the damage, things took a deadly turn. During a dive to fix one of the habitat's leaks, Aquanaut Barry Cannon, a highly experienced diver, tragically died. The official cause of death was listed as drowning, attributed to a faulty breathing apparatus that failed to deliver the correct gas mixture at depth. The death of Barry Cannon effectively ended the Sealab 3 mission, and the Navy conducted an investigation into the incident. While technical failures were identified, some within the diving community and the project speculated that sabotage might have played a role. These suspicions were fueled by the fact that Sealab 3 had been facing numerous technical issues from the start, and the Navy's handling of the situation led to further mistrust. Despite these rumors, no conclusive evidence of sabotage was ever found, and the official reports pointed to human error and equipment failure as the primary causes of the mission's failure. The tragic outcome of Sealab 3 led to the cancellation of the program and marked the end of the Navy's attempts at creating permanent underwater habitats. The mystery surrounding the death of Barry Cannon and the abrupt end of Sealab 3 still lingers, with some believing that the full story has never been told. Whether or not sabotage was involved, the incident serves as a sobering reminder of the dangers inherent in pushing the boundaries of human exploration, particularly in the unforgiving environment of the deep sea. Sealab 3 remains a poignant chapter in the history of underwater exploration, marked by both ambition and tragedy. Maui Rapist. The Maui Rapist is the nickname given to an unidentified serial rapist who terrorized the island of Maui, Hawaii during the 1970s and early 1980s. The case has remained one of the most haunting and unsolved mysteries in Hawaii's criminal history, leaving the community in fear and sparking widespread media coverage during the time. The first known attacks attributed to the Maui Rapist began in the late 1970s. The assailant targeted young women, often breaking into their homes during the night. His modus operandi was both calculated and brutal. He would overpower his victims, often with a weapon, before subjecting them to horrific sexual assaults. In many cases, the attacker would leave little evidence behind, making it extremely difficult for law enforcement to track him down. The attacks were spread out over several years, creating an atmosphere of fear and anxiety across the island. Women were urged to take extra precautions, and the local police force intensified their efforts to catch the predator. Despite these efforts, the Maui Rapist continued to elude capture, with each new attack adding to the frustration of investigators and the terror of the community. One of the significant challenges in solving the case was the lack of forensic technology available at the time. DNA testing, which would later revolutionize criminal investigations, was not yet in use, leaving detectives reliant on more traditional methods like fingerprinting, eyewitness accounts, and physical evidence from the crime scenes. Unfortunately, these methods yielded few solid leads. Over time, the attacks attributed to the Maui rapist appeared to stop, leading some to speculate that the assailant might have left the island, been incarcerated for another crime, or even died. However, the case was never officially closed, and the identity of the Maui rapist remains unknown. In recent years, advancements in DNA technology have led to renewed interest in the case, with some hoping that modern forensic techniques might finally bring the elusive criminal to justice. Despite the passage of decades, the Maui rapist case continues to be a dark chapter in Maui's history, a reminder of the vulnerability of a peaceful island community to the horrors of a predator who struck without warning and disappeared just as mysteriously. Charlie Chopoff. Charlie Chopoff is the chilling nickname given to an unidentified serial killer who preyed on young boys in New York City during the early 1970s. The name derives from the gruesome nature of the crimes, which involved the mutilation of the victims' bodies. This case remains one of the most disturbing and unsolved mysteries in the city's history. The series of murders began in March 1972, when the body of an 8-year-old boy was discovered on a rooftop in Harlem. The child had been brutally stabbed multiple times, and his body showed signs of mutilation. Over the next 2 years, several more young boys, primarily African American and Latino, were found murdered in a similar manner, leading police to believe they were dealing with a serial killer. The murders sent shockwaves through the city, particularly in the Harlem and Washington Heights neighborhoods, where fear gripped the community. Parents were terrified for their children's safety, and the police were under immense pressure to find the killer. Despite an intensive investigation, the case proved challenging. The killer's attacks were sporadic, and he left behind little physical evidence, making it difficult for law enforcement to establish a solid profile or identify a suspect. In 1974, a man named Erno Soto was arrested after allegedly attempting to lure a young boy. Soto, who had a history of mental illness, reportedly confessed to some of the murders, but his confession was inconsistent and lacked specific details that would conclusively link him to the crimes. Due to insufficient evidence, Soto was never formally charged with the murders attributed to Charlie Chopoff, and the case remains officially unsolved. The mystery of Charlie Chopoff lingers as one of New York City's most heinous and haunting unsolved cases. The fear and horror that swept through the community during that time left a lasting impact, and the families of the victims are still waiting for closure. Despite the passage of time, the search for answers continues, with investigators and true crime enthusiasts hoping that modern techniques might one day shed light on the identity of the killer. Tear Freeway. Tear Freeway is an unsettling chapter in the annals of crime that continues to haunt and perplex investigators. The term Tear Freeway refers to a series of brutal and violent incidents that occurred along a stretch of highway known for its desolate and remote stretches. The exact location varies in reports, but the cases typically involve a pattern of violence that emerged in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The first known case associated with Tear Freeway involved the discovery of a series of abandoned vehicles along the highway. These vehicles, seemingly left in haste, were found to contain distressing evidence suggesting violent confrontations. In some instances, personal belongings and traces of blood were discovered inside, hinting at a series of violent crimes. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Tear Freeway cases was the nature of the victims. Many of them were found to be individuals who had been traveling alone, making the highway a prime target for the perpetrators. The victims were often identified through their personal effects, as they were frequently left in remote and hard-to-reach areas. The brutality of the crimes and the lack of witnesses made it challenging for law enforcement to piece together a coherent narrative. Investigations into the Tier Freeway incidents have been complicated by the nature of the terrain and the sporadic nature of the crimes. The highway's remote stretches and lack of regular traffic meant that witnesses were few and far between. Additionally, the sporadic and seemingly random nature of the attacks made it difficult to establish a clear pattern or motive behind the crimes. Despite extensive efforts by local law enforcement and federal agencies, the Tier Freeway cases remain largely unsolved. Various suspects have been investigated over the years, but none have been definitively linked to all of the incidents. The lack of concrete evidence and the remote nature of the crime scenes have left many questions unanswered. In the years since the initial incidents, the Tier Freeway has become a symbol of unresolved violence and fear. The case continues to attract attention from true crime enthusiasts and investigators alike, who hope that advances in forensic technology and renewed public interest might one day bring clarity to these haunting and tragic events. Consider subscribing to our channel if you find our videos entertaining and informative to never miss updates.